Friends and lovers, welcome to another Jimpressions for Middle-earth Shadow of War. I am now basically done with it. I've had my fill. I got the first ending of the game, got into some of the Shadow War stuff, and then just really got bored. Like, it was already starting to grind on me, and then by the time the Shadow War stuff is basically, here's more of the same, but taking a long time and with none of the story stuff to distract you, I realised I was done with Shadow of War. Now, I realise that some people are going to be like, oh, Jim, why are you bashing Shadow War again? I told you before that you go on about it too much. Well, I said I was going to do updated Jimpressions once I'd played further. I'm done with the game now, so here's more or less my final thoughts on the game itself. It's still alright at its core. You know, as a basic video game, it's fine. But Shadow of Mordor wasn't just a basic video game. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a typical AAA open-world game in many ways, full of open-world busy work, but it really can't be overstated how transformative the Nemesis system was, and how the deep connection you got to those orcs, whether they were orcs on your side or orcs that had become nemeses, or nemeses, that's the best way of putting it, isn't it? It really can't be overstated what an impact that had on the game, and how much more connected you felt to that game's world. Now, yes, I am just about to talk about the loot boxes again, because having now played the full game, I am under no illusion, I am within no doubt that the game has been affected by the loot box system. Because, I mean, here's a case in point, Push Crimp the Crafty is on the screen right now. I cannot tell you how many fucking Push Crimps I've seen in this fucking game. In the first Shadow of Mordor, yeah, you saw some repeated elements of the orcs, repeated physical features, you saw some names pop up, some titles pop up now and again, but with this one, it's so generic. It's hard to really get a grip on why these orcs are different or special. Even the legendaries, like, yeah, they've got some extra skills, but they don't really stand out from the crowd. And not only is there basically an embarrassment of push crimps, the really disappointing, that's the word for it, the real disappointment came when I got to the nominal end of the game, pre-Shadow Wars, and there's that moment, like in Shadow of Mordor, where the Nemesis Orc, the one that you've had the biggest story with throughout the game, that's been dynamically told throughout your interactions in a sort of non-scripted way, you know, the big bad of your personal story. That moment came, my Nemesis stepped out. I didn't know who the fuck it was. It was really like M. Bison in the Street Fighter, the movie from the 90s. For me, it was Tuesday. This orc comes out and is like, oh, we've enjoyed so much time together. We've got so much history. And I'm like, mate, you're new. I think you're actually new. I don't remember seeing you. I don't remember fighting you. Don't worry about this. This is just a drake being stuck in the cliff there. We fixed that. But yeah, back to the Nemesis, or lack thereof. I had no idea who this guy was. It wasn't the guy who had killed me several times. It wasn't the orc that had betrayed me and who I had continually shamed, and we'd had this, what I felt was a real rivalry. That orc, and I had history, but he just disappeared because he wasn't important, I guess. He wasn't really important, I guess. None of them are important because they're found in fucking loot boxes. They're found in chests. Orcs are loot drops. No different from the thousands of swords you could pick up in this game, from the thousands of hoods and armor that you can pick up in this game that have some slight physical differences, some stat upgrades, and you don't really feel connected to any of it. And that's a big problem with a lot of these games now that are adopting the not just with loot boxes, but getting more loot focused. It's a slight problem in Assassin's Creed Origins as well, where there's a lack of connection to any of this gear that you get. And when that applies to the Orcs, when that applies to the thing that made Shadow of Mordor what it was, well, like I say, I'm not mad at this point. I'm just disappointed. What a shame. And to further drive home the disposability of the Orcs, let us not forget that they can and will die, and I've witnessed more allied Orc deaths in this game than I certainly ever encountered in the whole of Shadow of Mordor. And one thing I've learned is that if you do somehow get attached to one of these generic, increasingly generic captain Orcs that are supposed to be unique, if you do get attached to any of them, don't do anything with them. Just make them an overlord of something. I've not witnessed any of them dying through that yet, but just keep them away from anything. Don't use them as a bodyguard. Don't use them for fortress raids, and if they are legendaries, especially do fuck all with them. You might think that having a legendary orc would, give you advantages and bonuses, and that would be a cool, good thing to use and do. No. I can only speak from personal experience, but whenever I've done a fortress raid, the first ones to die are the legendaries. And when I say die, I don't mean like they get into the fight and die. I mean, the moment we start charging towards the castle, it instantly cuts over to where one of my legendaries are and just says, bled out. And that's it. Doesn't matter if, they're the right level for the job. It doesn't matter how strong the army is. For some reason, and again, it's just from my experience, every legendary I've had that I've put to some sort of work has died. Quickly and in a way that really feels like it should not have happened. And don't even get me started on pit fights. One way to level up an orc is to throw it into a pit fight against another orc. This is also how you get them to infiltrate as bodyguards to betray a captain that you might want to, fuck over. You get them into pit fights, and these are fully AI-controlled fights between these orcs. And, you could argue that they're not all great at fighting Talion, but they're a fuck's sake better at fighting Talion than they are at fighting each other. Now, unlike with any other part of the game, for some reason, this part of orc culture, Talion respects. So you sit there watching two orcs flail at each other, controlled by the AI. Sometimes they do nothing. They just circle around each other. I have witnessed, I shit you not, without my ability to intervene, because I can't, I've seen an orc that I pit against an enemy orc. Mine was 10 levels higher. And because he did nothing, he got his ass kicked. And there was nothing about the weaknesses or anything. It's not like he was afraid or intimidated or had anything exploited. He just stood there and let the other one just basically slash him to death. It was so effing stupid. Still, to change the subject for a minute, the game is compulsively playable. It's not like you're always having fun with it, but I did play it a lot just because it was very easy to habitually start and get into and just turn your brain off and run around basically enslaving orcs and robbing them of any sort of free will they might have. I realise that's been a bit of a controversy, and I've got to admit, even with the first game, it is a little uncomfortable. And, because the way that the character talks is like these orcs are fighting for you, and you're supposed to feel bad if they betray you, but it's like, no, you did just, fucking get in their heads, It's not like you're getting in their heads to sell the microtransactions, so, every cloud has a silver lining, but it often feels like you talk about building your army, and it's not your army because they're not fighting for you. They don't really give a shit about you. And so it's hard to take satisfaction from building an army in that way. You can, obviously switch your... I've got such a bad habit for trying to vault over enemies' heads. But, you know, you can get over it and everything. But it is an odd thing, especially in a game that is trying to sort of condemn it and say something about it, but at the same time doesn't really, because it just embraces it from a gameplay angle. The story of the game overall has been okay. It's a lot of, hey, here's this famous Lord of the Rings character, here's another one, and that's about all that one can say about that. It was an okay story, weaker than the first one, and just a bit bleh. But here we get to show you what impact this game's market has on the game. Now, in Shadow of Mordor, you go to a realm where there are orcs, and you'll want to play the game, build your way up into the ranks, take over orcs, get them to betray other orcs and kill them for you. Here, and this is just using in-game currency. You'll notice on the market screen I've got like 50 of the premium stuff, 50 gold. I don't know where the fuck it came from, but it must have been some reward for something. But these are all orcs that I got just using the Mirian, the free in-game currency. And I'm deploying them in an area I haven't even started playing yet. Now look how many orcs I have here. These are all the followers. These are all the orcs that do my bidding. And you select them, and you can basically seed any new area you go to with them. I've got enough here to practically take over the area, sans obviously doing the missions to get the captain, like the main captains and the overlord and that. But I can basically just take over the field with what I've got. And when there are no more spaces, as we see here, you just set the orc to attack another one. The game decides. And that's the only time I've seen the game pit your orcs against their orcs, where you seem to have a practical guarantee of success. I've not lost an allied orc that way. We'll speed this process up. The only drawback to this is it's dull and boring, but it's time, it's time efficient. If you don't mind sitting there waiting for the constant server interfaces, waiting for catalog, waiting for garrison, all of those fucking loading stuff, then yeah, you can just fill the army with your stuff. Here we go, look. There goes the Regal there. Now this is interesting. Guru the Pickler just beat Turo the Pickler, or Turon the Pickler. A new Pickler in town, I guess. Just another, example of how generic and lacking in individuality the orcs have become now. When I'm just seeing so many picklers. I mean, Push Crimp. I'm sorry to keep on with Push Crimp, but Push Crimp is such a standout name that you shouldn't be seeing it 3, 4, 5 times a session, I say session, I mean over the length of the game. But anyway, moving on again from that. I realise that's what I'm mainly talking about, but I am fully, you may disagree, but oh, there we go. That one wasn't yeah, but that was an epic one, not a legendary one, but it just bled out, just because. That's just how disposable your orcs are. Never get attached to them. Never get attached to them. But, I know I'm going on about the loot box stuff so much, and I have been talking about it a lot in other videos, and I know some of you are sick about it, some of you, have become aggressively apathetic to it, but I really do feel it's had such a dominating impact on this game, and the way the orcs work, the way the world works. So that's why I'm talking about it so much. Is it talked about so much in an average review where you want to, people want to know how does it play, how does this do, how does that do? No. But this is my video now, and I get to bang on about whatever bits I want to. But we will shelve that again for the moment and talk about this. This is an online conquest. Basically, it's the same as invading a fortress in the single-player game without having to work your way up through the ranks to do it. You assemble an army of allied orcs. You give them, you have to spend Mirren or whatever it is, Miriam, to do it, to give them upgrades. You could give one of your followers like a siege beast that throws poison boulders over there, and then it's a point capture game. You and your allied orcs, with whatever upgrades you've given them, march in, storm the place, and cause some shit. And it's pretty good, pretty fun. except of course for that constant risk that your allies will die. This is the only time I've ever seen that happen, by the way. In all of my conquesting, conquest is really what I should have said, I've never seen my allied orcs be so efficient. Part of it, I think, is because I did just bring some super high level ones here, but even then, normally when the AI goes, it's still a crapshoot no matter what the levels are. But this is how any sort of conquest works. We capture the points, then go for a one-on-one fight, which seems silly to me. It seems silly to me that Talion, with a conquering army at his back, decides to face an overlord and all his pals on his own. Seems silly to me. Now, if I'd have remembered to do what I had planned to do, while I was opening the door here, I was like, right, I'm going to go over there, then I'm going to summon a Graug and summon my Orc bodyguard to try and even the odds, but I think I just completely forgot to do that here. But that's the only backup you can get, is if you've unlocked those abilities to summon an animal and summon a bodyguard, you can do that. My bodyguard's actually on cooldown, so I couldn't have done that, but my Graug, you see that at the bottom, the summon thing, I could have brought the Graug into the mix. I just didn't, but hey, here we are, hacking and slashing, getting on with business. Now, the combat, I've got to agree with my mate Gav, who hosts Podquisition with me. I've got to agree with him that when the combat is against you and a few orcs, there's a real nice flow to it. When it's you and a whole bunch of orcs, it's a real pain in the fucking arse. Because of things like this, you know, where you want to roll towards a certain enemy, but you keep vaulting over the one that's immune to the vaulting. And this is a problem also shared by the Batman games when they get a lot of enemies around you. Multiple countering prompts. Right now, we're dealing with defenders, the ones with shields. They're the ones I really fucking hate. We're dealing with the Olags, I think that's what they are, Ologs, or whatever they're called, they're just these big fuckers who have X prompts to avoid them and circle prompts to avoid them. The defenders have X prompts, the regular enemies have triangle prompts, and all of this countering with all the different buttons with a small window of time, that's when it gets a little bit too hard to follow for me. Others might not have that problem, but to me, I'm just like, that's too much. It's too much. Get on a Caragor. Take the Caragor. Cause some shit. So I took over his Caragor, and then that made the fight a lot more easy. And because I have the upgrade where I can summon another Caragor without even needing my, you know, super meter filled, I forget what the might meter, takes a bit of the Caragor's health, and I can bring in more Caragors. So that thinned it out. I don't know what was happening there. I just stood there and let myself get clobbered in the back of the head. I hate those berserkers as well. You attack them head on and they just headbutt you. So there's a lot to keep track of, a lot to remember in a fight that's got a lot of different mixed enemies in there. And that can be a bit chaotic. But when it's one of those things where when it works, it works. When it doesn't quite work, it's a bit fucking annoying. But it's satisfying when it works, when it all pulls together, when you take over a fortress and you haven't lost any legendaries, when you finally slap your hand on an orc's face and you shame the fucker. You shame that fucker so hard and hope they lose their mind when they do it. That one didn't, but one I did do it to once did it. It did happen, I know. And then you stand out there and you tell your army of orcs that are not there under their own free will what a great job they did. And then you wait for them all to die because orcs are loot and orcs don't matter. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a break now and play that mini game that I've invented. You know what it's called. Let's fuck with the Orc Merchant!